Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm Ravi Shankar, and this is Isobreak. I have on screen all of the wonderful readers that we are going to have this morning or evening, depending on where you are, and we're going to hear from each of them. But let me just say, and those of you that are tuning in for the first time, Isobreak, of course, is a production of Asia Pacific Writers and Translators and the New York Writers Workshop. It was started actually in May of 2020 during the pandemic. And I'm mentioning a little bit of this. I want to actually, I was just looking back at the old promos that we had, and I wanted to share that because this is in fact going to be my final time hosting Isobreak. It's been a great honor and pleasure to do this. And we started, of course, because the conference that we run at APWT, which travels to different parts of Asia, was canceled that year. It was meant to be in India, and we were thinking of ways that we could stay connected. And so we began this reading series, and you can see here, this is all archived on YouTube. We've had everyone from Pulitzer Prize winner Vijay Seshadri, T.S. Eliot Prize winner George Surtzes, to emerging poets, Singaporean poet Joshua Ip. Every 6 weeks or so, we would have another iteration. And normally, as we do today, poets from different parts of the country. This recent one, I was a personal favorite, the Pacific Showcase that Craig Santos Perez helped put together. I think what it showed, and especially during the pandemic, it made all of us feel less isolated. And I think that just both the work and also the Q&A that we have, which is really touched on some really interesting ideas from indigenous rights to healthcare to politics. And it's a real pleasure that this is archived for anyone to see. Without further ado, I know I warned people I'd wax nostalgic because it really has been such a pleasure to meet new people, see old friends, and hear all of this great work. But today we have 5 poets, and I think actually a flash fiction writer as well. And our first reader today, SHILPA DIKSHIT THAPLIYAL, is a former computer professional and now a bilingual poet and writer, and she's coming from Singapore. She's a nominee for a Pushcart Prize, the author of 2 poetry collections, including Bits Between Sips of Masala Chai and Chimes of the Soul. And her poems have been featured in the Best Asian Poetry, Tiger Moth, the Taj Mahal Review, among other anthologies and journals. Her poems have been translated into Japanese, into Chinese art and Spanish. I hope we can hear a little bit about that in our conversation. And she reads poetry in Malaysia, the US, Mumbai, Australia, and volunteers with the Poetry Festival Singapore. She's currently a literary organizer and studying creative writing at Nanyang Technical University in Singapore. And so it is a great pleasure to start today's reading with Shilpa. Welcome, Shilpa. Thank you so much.
Hey, thank you so much, Ravi, for the warm and kind introduction. Thank you, New York Writers Workshop and Asia Pacific Writers and Translators for the session. And a warm hi to all my fellow writers and our lovely audience. So I'll start with reading 3 poems. The first poem, which I'm going to be reading, was published in the Tiger Moth Review. And I'd written this during the COVID times. And because of all the COVID restrictions, we couldn't travel, right? And so I used to make these daily phone calls with my mom, who's based in Mumbai. And those video calls with her, and we would discuss, such mundane things as like, how does the sky look today? Of course, they were all brilliant skies and sunsets, and how deserted the streets are. And like, she would fill me in about, stories about our relatives and like, what phone call she had with some other people. So this is the poem, which is, I'll read it out to you. The time the skies speak to me. It is 8:30 p.m. here, which means it's 6 p.m. in Mumbai. Time for Amma to loan me a glimpse of eggshell clouds dotting craters of gray. The sun doesn't set until 7:15. Skies of summer, she says, of the sullen breeze and cows resting under a peepal tree. Wingless days descend on pebbled sidewalks. Stray strands of lethargy stream clumsily into homes. Amma points to the new pair of terracotta figurines in the corner. They look cherubic against the unbridled flow of ember in the skies. Sometimes a sickle moon appears at the dusky threshold, a slender bride flushed with translucent love. I listen to the distant cry of the muezzin as Amma laments about the passing seasons. Yesterday, Amma panned the camera to a parakeet on the railing. I admired the pea-green plumage, the cherry beak, its long feathered tail. It glanced at the phone, ring-necked head tilted 40 degrees, and for a moment our eyes locked. A bunch of them live in a house down the chalk. They sail the Deccan sky, sit on the jacaranda tree, and chirp in the neighborhood before flocking back home. Amma's voice trailed into the caverns of my throat. So this was the first poem. And I'm so happy and grateful to Esther Vincent for publishing this in her online journal. The second poem is titled This is a Spam Poem, and it was placed second in the Letter Review Prize for Poetry. So this is how it goes. This is a spam poem, rasping on tongues, pungent in wicks of kerosene, lathi-charged, tear-gassed, knifed into shreds, blood-sodden, echoing songs of migration, bearing doves for peace and sunflowers to seed. This is a spam poem, lazing on a charpoy with dhoti-clad men with chillums, spouting new rules on menarche and untouchability. Women stripping ghungat, sieving and straining charcoal ears, seizing the saber of daylight to slice webs of their unvoiced plight. This is a spam poem. It filters through curtains, a nascent crescent, lighting obscure nights with dreams tied in golden leaves, swept into river mouths and open seas to build bridges for our stories, shoved and stuffed in our lungs. This is a spam poem where being human is the only drill, where words of Emily, Yeats, and Tagore repeat on recorder, and you hoard sheaves of paper as sinew, wait for the morning dew and grass to grow untamed again. This is a spam poem lying in a folder below a string of urgent pleas, reminders for subscriptions, super deals, ready for a click of dismissal or for your perusal. And the last poem, it's titled The Ghazal of an Immigrant, and it appeared in the Best Asian Poetry 2021. It was edited by Sudeep Sen, a very accomplished poet, and it was published by Kitab. The Ghazal of an Immigrant. I should read it from the book, actually. So, yeah. Fledgling, how many years before you take roots? A new recruit, what can I make of my roots? I scrape my palms, enlist my foreign lame, shoulder my alien shadow, a brown beetroot. I nap skeleton years and wrap a new foliage, a semblance of balance with partial roots. Tilling into the land, lopsided, headlong, I cement my bare hand and plant aerial roots. Hourly and monthly, I swallow my story. Cracked and deboned, I revise my square roots. Unheard, unsung, I bemoan my identity, and words dotting pages unravel deep roots. O immigrant, adrift in borrowed waters, anchor and thrive, buoyed by lotus roots. So thank you. So these are the 3 poems which I want to read, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Shilpa. And we will hear from you at the end when we have our conversation. It was lovely to hear you conjure that landscape. And welcome, everyone. Those of you that are just joining us again, this is Isobreak, the APWT New York Writers Workshop co-production. And I'm actually really thrilled to introduce the next 2 readers who are my colleagues at Tufts. And in a way, I mentioned this is my final time emceeing, and it's in part because I want to focus more on the local, on the work that I'm doing in Mass. And I'm really lucky to have such wonderful colleagues, such as Joshua and Anna. And our next reader today, Anna V.Q. Ross. Our most recent book, Flutter won the Benjamin Saltman Poetry Award from Hen Press. Her previous books include If a Storm, which won the Robert Dana Unhinga Prize for Poetry, Figuring, and Hawk Weather. She is a Fulbright Scholar, a Mass Cultural Council Fellow, poetry editor for Salamander, and her work appears or is forthcoming in such places as the Kenyon Review, the Harvard Review, the Missouri Review, The Nation, and elsewhere. She teaches at Tufts and in Emerson at the Prison Initiative, which is also one of my passions. And maybe we can talk a little bit about during our Q&A. And she lives in Dorchester, Boston, where, and hopefully we can talk about this too, she raises chickens, which is not a particularly Bostonian thing, but thank you so much for waking up early to be with us this morning, Anna.
Cheers. Thank you so much, Ravi. I actually know quite a few people who are raising chickens in Boston, but we'll talk about that later. I'm going to read some poems from this book, Flutter. I don't know if I am showing it to the camera properly. I think not. Okay. And I'm really happy to be here and excited to meet some new people from around the world. So hello from Boston. I'm going to start with a poem that alludes to the fact that my mother is not an American. She moved here. She immigrated here when just before I was born from Dublin, Ireland. So you'll hear a little bit about that in this poem. Sorry, actually, that's not the one I want to start with. Anxious Talker. And it begins with a quote from Rumi. There is a place where words are born of silence, Rumi says. Is it a place of anxious talkers, the sort who can't be in an elevator without remarking on the weather, not waiting for a response? How about those pats? Or a place for all of us who knew the answer in second grade, but were afraid to raise our hands, and now can't stop shouting, 7! It's 7! I know it too! At the teacher who praised the one girl who spoke, shaming the rest of us. She was the same girl who pulled your hair at recess if you wore braids, and once punched you so hard in the thigh it left a bruise the size and shape of the dark purple pansies your mother planted each spring, small purple flags to claim the soil of a place she wasn't born into. Slowly the bruise grew a yellow halo, and you were silent about that too, until your mother found it in the bath. The words that came next were hers, fear that you understood only as anger. Why didn't you tell? And a visit to the teacher despite your pleas. It wouldn't work, you knew. That night, awake in the silent house, you fingered the bruise and heard or thought you heard a humming that might have been a word. So yes, I am in Boston and in Dorchester particularly, which is the hometown of another one of our readers this morning. I just found out, which is exciting for me. And this is a kind of a poem of my neighborhood. There are a lot of self-portraits in this book, and this is one of them. Self-portrait with alternate ending. Keep 5:30, perfect June, almost evening. Keep forgetting dinner and walking out into the day, exhaling sweat, exhaust, and unseen sea like a lost gull. Keep the mile away bay we head for now, the baby in her stroller, queen at ship's prow, trying her new word, kitty, kitty, on every moving thing. Keep the humped driveway that catches the stroller's wheel, the cracked sidewalk and ragged curb where we stop to let 3 boys run past, t-shirts flashing white. They don't turn to see us. Keep the boys as we start out again to cross our street, and kitty, kitty, keep 3 more boys running, not so fast, but tracking the first 3. They stop for us who have interrupted their game. The tallest one, his red and white striped shirt, his hand in his pocket. Keep the shirt, keep the hand, not the pocket. Keep the movement of his legs as he again begins to run. Keep the neighbor who calls to us as we cross over. Keep the mother who is sitting home with supper, or who is working in a hotel, changing other people's sheets, or who is pulling into her driveway and calling to her neighbor, "Have you seen him?" Her boy who stops now to take the gun out of his pocket, to fire its pop, pop, pop at the other boys retreating, their t-shirt flags waving, "Don't keep this." And the unsound as it arcs, as it tunnels through the air, or the whirring of the stroller's wheels as our legs unfurl, no wall or open door, but endless pavement and a bullet that is somewhere. Keep it somewhere, somewhere fallen in the grass, where later plainclothes cops will find it, reassure us that we weren't an intended target. Take out target, take out intention. Keep the baby in her stroller, singing softly now her kitty, kitty, as we jolt home, the sky a mask behind us. I'm going to read another one, another Dorchester one, because it mentions my chickens. Back Porch Obad. It seems appropriate to read an Obad this early in the morning for me. Back Porch Obad. Through the highway's underlying monochord, through gear strain and downshift on avenues marked with blue evacuation route signs, a siren interrupts, then recedes. Through air brake release and city bus clutch at corners, a slight, hollow wooden mallet tremolo. Tap, tap. It could be the neighbor's downspout dripping to the gutter, but no, too rhythmic, stopping and again starting as though it's caught me catching it here on the porch, having just let our chickens out into the backyard, yesterday's snow subsiding to rain, and the buds on the apple trees surviving despite late freeze. Tap, tap. I strain for it, a second hand that records and then relents. Is it in the elm grown thin with disease, or a street-leaning spruce? Tap, tap. My alarm buzzes my hip, and inside the house the kids need breakfast, coats, shoes, before we leave to meet the school bus, already shouldering its metronomic warning lights through traffic toward our curb. And how can there be chickens and apple trees amid all this asphalt and combustion? How can there be children? But there are, and also on a storm-softened trunk somewhere nearby, its quick bill pausing, then resuming dissection of bark and wood rot for ants or beetle larvae, anything that moves or grows within it, a woodpecker. I'm going to shift a little ways out of Dorchester now, and I'm going to move to I-93, which is the main highway that runs through Boston. I spend a lot of time on I-93. I called it my native habitat yesterday to a friend of mine who caught me there while I was going back and forth on an errand. And this is a poem that incorporates some found text to sort of get at the interruptedness of parenthood, of motherhood. There's a lot in this book about motherhood and childhood. And so this uses found text as a way to kind of get at how we're constantly having to broach interruptions and sort of incorporate what those interruptions bring up for us in our days as we keep going through. And this is something that is not unique to parenthood, but it's particularly sharp in my parenthood. So the text that it includes is Dr. Christine Blasey Ford's testimony during Brett Kavanaugh's Senate confirmation hearing. So some folks here in the States, maybe everywhere in the world, I don't know, may recognize it. It starts out with a quote by Senator Amy Klobuchar. So this is called Fugue. Can you tell us what you don't forget? The senator's voice repeats from the radio. It's rush hour, Boston, I-93, driving home from dance class with my daughter in the back seat. Her 12-year-old legs stretched long in pink body wrappers brand spandex as she wonders aloud what we're going to eat for dinner. Air brakes wheeze, then release beside us as a bus muscles past. And should I change the station as the senator's voice repeats, can you tell us what you don't forget? Above the traffic, rush hour, Boston, I-93, my daughter in the back seat. Girl whose body I once unwrapped from mine. Is she listening now as the woman speaks? I was pushed onto the bed. His weight was heavy. I shake my head. Boston, rush hour, I-93, as if I could swerve by what edges up in me. He put his hand over my mouth. It was hard for me to breathe. Boston, rush hour, I-93, but I'm cruising a suburban street of dandelion lawns, legs the same age as my daughter, who jams her knees against my seat as I hit the brakes when one last car squeezes in ahead of me. Can you tell us? Boston, rush hour, I-93 is fixed to a grid of red. What you don't forget? Taillights that bleed their after images. Can you? Against gray sky. I'm tired. Forget. Picturing my bed back home. What you don't? Quilt pulled tight against the sheets. Can you? Don't forget. Or is it that other bed? What you? And what year was it? Forget. Don't. What day? Don't. Can you forget? How? Tell us. Don't tell. What did he? What? Can you forget? Don't tell us. Touch me? I was wearing a one-piece bathing suit. I believed he was going to rape me. Boston, rush hour, I-93, a tail light flickers, horns begin to beep. How many times will I repeat this drive? Mom, when are we going to move? Her voice reaches toward me, and I ease my weight up off the brake, considering the question. The miles, like bodies, fall between us and what I don't forget. In Boston, rush hour, I-93, driving home from dance class with my daughter in the back seat. And I'm going to close with one short one that I feel like I really want to read, considering the recent reports of so many people drowned off the coast of Greece when a freighter carrying, I think, nearly 700 migrants, refugees, foundered within view of the Greek Coast Guard. And this was just a couple of days ago. And as I mentioned, my mom is an immigrant, and I think a lot about what it takes to leave one place and go to another. So this is called The Crossing, and you'll hear a few more quotes from the New York Times. This is from a few years ago. The Crossing. In this morning's paper, a story of 13 women drowned off the coast of Lampedusa. Heavy weather, the ship found listing. When the rescue vessels heard the distress call, they hurried toward it. And when the migrants, this is the name the Italian Coast Guard gave the women, the 8-month-old baby, and nearly 50 others drifting with them on the water's skin for days. The paper doesn't say how many. When the migrants saw hope approaching, motoring across what had been empty waves, they rushed together to meet it. It was this sudden movement, the paper says, that lifted the boat sideways like a hand raised in greeting, so that the people, let's name them people, those sisters, mothers, children, slid quickly from its palm into the water, which they found opened to them after all, yielding like an unlatched gate to their fall, and then behind them closing. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. That was great. And I put, there's a link to Anna's latest book, Flutter Kick, in our comments. Welcome, everyone. I'm Ravi Shankar. We're in the middle of Isobreak 23. Hard to believe that there have been 23 episodes, but as I mentioned, we've been going for 3 years. Hopefully we'll continue, and I will be able to join on the other side of the camera. So I'm really excited next to introduce another colleague of mine, JOSHUA NGUYEN, the author of Come Clean, which won the Felix Pollak Prize in Poetry, the Writer League of Texas Discovery Award, and the Mississippi Institute of Arts and Letters Poetry Award. Hopefully when we have our Q&A, we can talk about what it's like to live in the Deep South. He's also the author of the chapbooks American Lukbat for My Mother and Hidden Labor and the Naked Body. He's a Vietnamese-American writer, a college national poetry slam champion, and a native Houstonian who has received fellowships from Kundiman, Tin House, the Sundress Academy, the Vermont Studio Center, and been published in The Wildness, the Texas Review, Auburn Avenue, and elsewhere. He's also a humor writer for the Offing Mag, the Kundiman South co-chair, a bubble tea connoisseur, and he loves a good pun. He received his PhD from the University of Mississippi and currently teaches with me at Tufts University. So JOSHUA, thank you so much for being here with us.
Thanks for having me, Ravi. I'm currently cat sitting right now, as you can see. And so if you hear like sounds of anguish in the background, one of the cats really misses their owner. I've actually been trying to distract him off screen. So I'm doing some like multitasking at the same time, so it's not too loud. Yeah, I'll read 3 poems for y'all. Usually when I do a reading in the morning, I like to start with this poem from my upcoming manuscript I'm working on. The upcoming manuscript, one part of it really uses like the language of gym bros and like kind of toxic masculinity language, and like puts it on its head. But we know one concept of working out is to have rest days. So there's rest days, like quieter poems throughout the manuscript. So this is a poem called Rest Day, Coffee, Coffee, Love, Love. Your hands, brown stained filter of kindness, rush of caffeine sleuthing its way in the brain, a secret agent imposter passing as adenosine antagonist. Lock and key enzyme to the heart's capillaries, signals to the biome of your gut to wake up and smell the humid cobblestone. Rectum sphincter relaxing, while the cardinal worms along the magnolia branch, pacing back and forth, waiting for your faux-hawked love to join. Before you clench your butt, and before the bathroom break, and before the coffee cools and new acids are produced, and before the bluebirds bicker on which bluebird is theirs, or almond, or soy, or oats. We freeze our ground eyes to each other. Ankles humid, caressing, breathing. I would love you with a caffeine deficit, still with the slug in my step, sure. But I'd rather love you with a cup, with my pores unclogged, open to your generous frothing of heart murmurations, latte dedications, and our bodies, and obad, and obad, and obad. Shout out to everyone drinking coffee right now. Cheers. You might have heard OG yelling in the background. That's the cat with a bit of anxiety. This next poem I'm going to read is actually the last poem in my book, Come Clean. Come Clean, really thinks about this idea of compartmentalizing, physical things, physical space, along with like mental space and trauma, and what happens when those two things kind of combine. So there's a lot of like imagery of cleaning, organizing, and cooking, and a lot of quotidian things. And the last poem is called Hoarder, and it's from the perspective of a mother figure of the speaker. I wanted to end the poem with the mother speaker being able to speak back against the main speaker. So this is called Hoarder. We left everything so you could have everything. Now we have some things and you want us to have nothing. Your old trophies, relics, proof you tried to make us proud. Our jade at the bottom of a boat capsized by salt. Our first couch swept by flood, they said, couldn't happen in a no-flood zone. Your father and I gathered our urns we collected and tied them to the boat and called it an anchor and called it grounded and called it land ho, home of the free-range farms filled with meat we never have to kill ourselves. I could have been the wife of a general, could have lived in decadence, a fresh crab meat pre-picked apart, but my mother latched onto an idea of independence, clawed onto the image of America, the sponsor, the savior, not the safer. There are pearls in the ground next to my nieces, argon anklets, necklaces touched by napalm, rings with black nail residue. There was no space for trinkets or tombs. The dead is a permanence more fit for forever frills. Only room for pockets filled with dragonflies, just dirty forearms and touches by soldiers and your grandmother. You can clear out your childhood bedroom. I'll still find the permanent marker behind the paint. But you leave our attic alone, a mouth, a stomach, cardboard boxes of paper cuts and newspapered porcelain. You leave our attic as is, or else I'll tear open your belly button, store my gray hairs in there, along with your father's fishing pole and, of course, our tongues. I'll open you up. I'll use a dragonfly as a key. And my final poem I will read just got published in Cultural Daily. It's kind of fitting. I recently moved up here to Boston, to the Northeast in general, in January to teach at Tufts. I grew up in Houston, Texas, and then I spent the last 6 years in grad school in Mississippi. And it was a difficult transition, somewhat of a lonely one, getting used to like Northeast, culture and mannerisms. And, I still miss like the hospitality element of the South, Southern hospitality. But there was one thing that really was like grinding my gears my first few weeks and months here, was that at Tufts, someone was skimming off my oat milk from the fridge. And so I think I was thinking about that and like, you know, how much I was missing the South at the moment. So I wrote this next poem, you know, after William Carlos Williams. And I just want to say right now that this poem is not directed towards Anna or Ravi. I know y'all are innocents and, you know, you didn't, you know, commit this office crime against me. So Ravi and Anna, don't put them on trial for this petty crime. Thank y'all so much for having me. This poem is called "This Is Just to Say I Am Done Labeling My Oat Milk in the Faculty Lounge. Instead, I will purchase a pink piggy bank for people to pay me pennies or nickels or whatever dimes they feel is needed for me to feed their bellies with oat milk, oat creamer, oatmeals for their shy mouths that won't introduce themselves to me in the hallways or at the faculty meetings. Maybe yes, maybe a printed QR code under a printed picture of my face from a year ago, smiling with chipped teeth with no dental insurance for 6 years. Who has time for petty office theft? Which professors have no guilt for the taking of my plums, my sushi, my goddamn leftover bagel bites? Is this a Northern thing, a Boston thing, a race thing? Faulkner or Lehman or Trethewey or Nezuka Matado wouldn't steal my milk, but I bet O'Hara or WCW would. I am just a part-time lecturer, not a full-time professor of gluten-free blueberry pastries. Y'all, those aren't even for me. They're for my love who is smarter than me, hotter than me, and whose tummy wails at the sight of me chumming down $3 slices of za at the train tracks off of Forest Hills, because I'm always hungry. I'm always searching for the cold plums I left in the refrigerator door. So sweet and so mine. Thank you all so much for having me.
Thank you, Joshua. It's great to have you and hear your poems. We have just come to the halfway point of Isobreak 23. Welcome, everyone. Again, those of you that are just joining us, I'm RAVI SHANKAR. This is the APWT New York Writers Workshop co-production. And I should say, Asia Pacific Writers and Translators has moved to a biannual schedule. So their annual conference will actually happen every 2 years. And I believe there's something planned for Indonesia, a kind of writing retreat. New York Writers Workshop is planning a return to Greece, to Athens next summer. So keep your eyes open for both of those. I'm really excited next to introduce a friend and a sister, LESLIANN HOBAYAN, a poet, essayist, priestess, and a badass mom, and also the host of the podcast Spiritual Grit, on which we had a really illuminating conversation some months ago. It's a show at the intersection of spirituality and activism, and her chapbook was just published, Divorce Papers, A Slow Burn. She's been nominated for a Pushcart Prize, a Best of the Net, and her work has appeared in the Rumpus, Asterix, the Grief Diaries, the Lantern Review, the Mom, and World Asian American Poets on Faith and Spirit. She's been awarded the James Merrill Fellowship for Poetry, the Vermont Studio Center, where I had the great privilege of spending some time with her, Mid-Atlantic Arts Foundation Writing Fellowship and residency at the Malay Colony and the Virginia Center for Creative Arts, Red Loaf Orion Environmental Writers Conference, and she currently teaches at Rutgers University in New Jersey. She's also a spiritual life coach for women of color, a yoga and meditation teacher, a tarot reader, and facilitates sacred healing circles for people of color. And she is definitely plugged in to the great energy source. So LESLIANN, thank you so much for being with us.
All right. Thank you, Ravi. And thank you to Plugged In to APWT for hosting this event. I'm so glad that we are virtual because getting my butt out of bed this early, like physically somewhere else would have been a challenge. So thank you to my fellow poets who have read so far. Amazing, amazing work. And so hearing your work has inspired me to share some of my newer work on my current manuscript, which is called Jeepney Girl and Archipelago. And so I'm thinking a lot about immigration. I'm thinking a lot about diaspora and what it's like to be the firstborn of immigrants. So I'm going to start with the opening poem of this new manuscript, and it is called Archipelago. Now, bear with me. The print is really small, and I'm old, so I don't have glasses for reading. Here we go. We're going to see what happens. Okay, Archipelago. Why is not a useful question at times like these when we think we know the answer, but I will ask anyway. Why am I not writing about the landscape, the lush green, the glacial water, impossible blues? Writing the self-conscious poem is never a good idea. But what the heck? Why am I not writing the poems of rage against the image of a drowned father and his young daughter, or the poems of despair? For I too have daughters, 3 to be exact. And why am I not writing about them or about being their mother or mothering or trying to be a mother who has an art practice that is appreciated less than banking? Why am I not writing poems about my fractured, pieced together identity of living in the diaspora, in the third culture, that no one really understands? And why am I not writing about being a mother to biracial kids in a world that favors hegemony? Why am I not writing about the arm injury, how it hurts to write? And is that a metaphor for something larger? What messages are stored in my body? Where is my decoder ring? What else am I not saying? My elbow aches, and so the muscles of my forearm overcompensate, but that too is strange because of the elbow, the tendons in the soft pocket where the arm bones meet. And I could look up their medical names, but that would take me off track and away from this poem of self-awareness. Are strained, which then affects the wrist, the shoulder, its front edge pulling, straining, like this poem, straining. What am I really writing about? How I want to go to sleep, to dream a poem into being. How I want to avoid all the notions that call to me, begging that I write about them. I do not want bad dreams or sad dreams. I just want language that floats to the top, like cream, like foam on a latte, but it is late and I am blubbering, looking for poetry while looking away from the things that call to me. I am the mother I always wanted but never had. Who am I, though? Who am I really if I am not the body nor the mind, but something divine? How do I bring together these islands of my life, this archipelago of myself? How to collect the me's, the brown girl, the mama, the daughter, the poet, the yogi, the hip-hop dancer, all of it and more. How to gather them up like flowers in my arms. Phew, I'm going to snap for myself, guys. It's really weird to be giving an online reading, I'm just going to say right off the bat, but I appreciate the comments and the chats that's going on behind the scenes. I can feel the energy. So that is me exploring all the facets of living in the diaspora. Lots of different pieces, lots of layers of identity that are happening. And so the trajectory of the manuscript really goes from like my parents immigrating to what it's like to grow up as their kid, and then to be a mom to kids who have no idea what that's like. So this poem is actually a haibun, and it's in the voice of, so Jeepney Girl is a persona that shows up in the manuscript occasionally. And a jeepney is a mode of public transportation in the Philippines, primarily in Manila. The way it started was the US bases that used to be there abandoned their Jeeps. They closed the bases down, abandoned the Jeeps. The Filipinos reclaimed it and said, hey, we're going to make art from this. And so they made art from it and created a jitney system with jeepneys. And so for me, that's a representation of just, you know, rebelling against the colonizers. And so Jeepney Girl is this persona that kind of moves through the manuscript. And so this is an immigration poem. Wedding Departure, haibun. It's after Ocean Vuong. Consider the air, thin, weightless. Who knew such heft of metal wings could take flight through nothing, through invisibility. I imagine the air carries us, a lift, aloft, a life toward what is possible, leaving behind the steel trap of martial through marital law, leaving a city closed in on itself like the petals of a dying sampagita, its decaying scent heavy in the air, an air that once was light, weightless, an air in which our wedding doves took flight when released from the papier-mâché bells that hung over our heads as we danced, forgetting, for a moment, the urgency of our own departure, watching feather wings flap in air saturated with the smell of sweat and laughter, lechon and sweet cake, the paper of pesos fluttering in the glide of our first dance, pesos pinned to our clothes, my white gown, your white suit, a gesture to bestow prosperity despite departure. Consider departure. Depart from here. Leave, take leave. Consider the calm in departure. To part, to separate, to depart. The splitting of something once joined. Consider departure. The split from home, but to leave in union with another, with you. To leave for the air between here and there. Over there, more air, perhaps. Over there, more space to breathe, more room to move without considering every move, more air to feel on my skin, light and thin. Consider the calm in departure. Now consider urgency in flight, the rapid flap of wings to escape the earth, to resist gravity, to break away into air, into breath, weightless into summer light, brilliant with more. A breeze in my hair, the weight of wings free to soar, to leave this homeland. I'm gonna snap for myself. Okay, so I have, I'm like, I have this poem that, it's a brief poem that my mom was looking at old pictures of back when I was a kid, and she just kind of nodded and like was proud of herself. She was like, I was brave. And I was like, oh, yeah. So to be an immigrant, to come to a foreign land and make a home here has to take some level of courage. So I wrote this little poem for her. It's called I Was Brave. I was brave back then. My mother startled by her own brazen actions of youth, like driving down the wrong way on a one-way in Manhattan. A petite Asian immigrant wielding the heft of a 1973 Oldsmobile Cutlass Supreme with her two young kids sliding around in the back seat, touring the city. How she took us up to the crown of Lady Liberty, the narrow steps steep until we could see the lay of the land, open and free. Woo-hoo. All right, so I have this other poem that's a little bit longer that I'm not ready to share. I'm such a tease. I'm like, I'm going to share this. No, I'm not going to share this. But yes, I have been examining my childhood, and it's been tricky with writing these poems, knowing that they'll probably see the light of day at some point, and my parents will read them. So it's been interesting to try to get to the core of the truth, and putting that notion off to the side, kind of. So I really am inspired by form in which some fellow Asian American poets have taken form. And so this poem is after Chen Chen, who does some really great things with prose poetry. So this is called With and Without, a Childhood Self-Portrait. With Punky Brewster bandana and banana seat bicycle, without training wheels. with pink handlebar streamers, without helmets, with my brother on big wheels in the street, with Rottweilers chasing us, with terror for our lives, without adults, without fitting in at school, with scratchy uniform jumpers, with a Valentine's card in 3rd grade from the white boy down the street, with the words, "I love you," in his best handwriting, with me believing him, without my parents knowing, without those words spoken in my house, with Tagalog clanking within those walls, but without it on my tongue, never on my tongue, with pancit and adobo and kare-kare and canned corned beef and spam and rice, always rice, always rice, always. With piano lessons, with a teacher who only showed me how to read notes and correlate them with the keys. Without musical expression, only flat banging. With my mom saying, "Play the cats." With my dad saying, "Perfect practice," because you don't want to practice something wrong. And so I never wanted to practice for fear of getting it wrong. With getting it wrong and falling out of line. With his belt coming out to play. With terror, I'd slide under my bed and ball up as small as I could so he couldn't reach me, and stayed quiet as I could, my heart beating loudly that the whole neighborhood could hear it, even the white boy who loved me, and I wondered if his love could save me, could calm my frantic heart like pink streamers in the wind. Phew. All right, my friends. That's a lot. Okay. So I'm gonna close out with 2 shorter poems that will lift us into some more positive energy. So as a spiritualist, I like to play with energy, and I feel like I kind of need to bring the energy up a little bit. So this is singing in the car. I have 3 daughters; they're all teenagers, and we love to sing in the car. And this always lifts me up. We are obsessed with Hamilton. And so I have a few poems that lift some lyrics from that soundtrack. And this particular poem starts with an epigraph from the Schuyler sisters, "How lucky we are to be alive right now." Singing in the car. How lucky we are to be alive right now. The Schuyler sisters. Driving home from practice, the roads already dark with night. My teenage girls and I are singing at the top of our lungs, a song about liberty and intellect, a fire of revolution building in the buildup of music. And we get swept up in crescendo, in which the melody breaks apart, bursting like fireworks, and we each grab a part as the lyrics layer upon each other, word on top of word, rhythm colliding, and I am swept up in the tides while time slows down. My daughters riding the waves, and a lump catches in my throat, tears rim my lids. How many more moments like this in the car? As my oldest readies for college, how lucky I am to be alive right now, to sing with my girls, all of us loud and untethered, as I turn onto our street in this car full of song. I get all in the thing, and it's hard to be here. I mean, I see you guys leaving comments and things, but I don't know. Okay, let's shake it off. To close, I've got Cosmic Garden. I'm very into the woo stuff. And the cosmos is a very fascinating place to be. So, Cosmic Garden. What starseed, what light? Seed made of stars, stardust, starlight, so much cosmos in the palm of your hand, curled into a fist, ready to fling across the sky, across the ocean, like so many skipping rocks, like so many seeds scattered across this cosmic garden, planting pinpoints of light to bloom into radiant love that blinds your heart, exploding with stars. Thank you so much, my friends, for tuning in and listening and all the things. So thank you, Ravi, for having me here.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, LESLIANN. And this brings us to our final performer of the evening. Again, this is Isobreak. I'm Ravi Shankar, Asia Pacific Writers and Translators, New York Writers Workshop co-production. And our final reader, and we'll hear from everyone at the end. So if anyone has questions, please put them into the chat. LUU DIEU, or Vivian, as she's known, was born in Vietnam and migrated, let me bring her on screen, to the US at a very young age. She's a prolific translator and is currently co-editor of a prominent Vietnamese-English literary magazine, Da Mao. She has an MBA from the University of Massachusetts, and we actually discussed a little Dorchester connection. She devotes her time between painting and volunteering for a charity organization, providing support for underprivileged children. She's currently an adjunct professor at Santa Ana College and divides her time between the US and Canada in Toronto. Her publications include 47 Minutes After 7, The Transparent Greenness of Grass, which is a flash fiction. Love that title. And a translation of LUU DIEU, published by Vagabond Press. And finally, A Century of Scapegoating, and most excitingly last year, a book called She Self-Winding, published with Ugly Duckling Presse, which is one of my favorite presses. And what a dream to be published by them. They do such beautiful books. So thank you so much for being with us, Vivian.
Thank you, Ravi. When I got invited to be part of this series in a joint email with everyone, I mean, I got to see their names, and, you know, the editor side of me kicks in. And instead of like choosing the poems I should be reading, I actually Google everyone, you know, check out your poetry. In all honesty, I'm much interested in discovering poetic voices and finding out more about my fellow colleagues than actually, you know, thinking about my own poems, you know. So I found out that Anna actually comes from my original hometown, Dorchester, and she's a great poet, an amazing poetry reciter. And when I see the name Nguyen on the poster, I was so excited to see Joshua Nguyen on there. You know, a little Vietnamese pride kicks in for me. And then I find out that SHILPA's poem has been translated into Japanese and Chinese arts and Spanish. And I'm like, okay, well, let me be the one who translate your work into Vietnamese too. So add to that list. And I subscribe to LESLIANN's Spiritual Grit podcast. I mean, you probably see my name, and I've been listening to 176 episodes and counting. So I am, and you know, Ravi, you know, you need no introduction. You've actually collaborated with mutual colleagues of mine on an anthology. So the world is so much more close-knitted than ever. So I'm absolutely delighted to be in your company. And I believe, at least for my own poetry, it is meant to be explored in silence. My poetry is not slam, doesn't have that slam quality. And you know, 8 minutes is a long time to talk about myself and talk about my poetry. So let's just get my reading over with so we can go to my favorite part, which is the Q&A. So I'm going to read you two poems. The first poem I'm going to read is from my latest chapbook, She Self-Winding. In a recent interview, I talked extensively about the shades of pink that I mentioned in this poem. It is the color associated with women and hence comes to represent femininity. But I actually want to use the pink to address feminism. So I guess after my reading, you can guess the kind of a gift that a feminist might or may not want to receive. So here is my poem, Neither Jewelry Nor Perfume. It was a slender pink, a $15 imprint of pink, same tint as the swollen gown, ruffling across the prickly probability. Into the arms of an abuser, same blush as the panty's palm, marked on one voodoo-induced evening. Same hue as the laptop that got her the masters, against the odds of disdain. It was a jelly liberty, a wet tongue of bar-bound long street, hard pottle flip and icy baby bell, swinger clubs swapping shades of sunsets and sheer sex band-aids. Accusation is anti-pink. Misunderstanding is pre-pink. Shells of memory penetrate cells, turning malnourished. Oily inferno of clemency. With black seductive crack. With white chastity fight. Blow by blow. Dual speed. From inaudible folding lips to audacious dermal rims. Feminism doesn't come with 2 AA batteries or instructions, but is self-operated. So that's kind of a humorous take on feminism. So the last poem I'm going to read is from my other book entitled M of December, published by Vermont Press. It's about how we are scientifically attracted to each other, but how we tend to make the same mistakes over and over again in history. And it is entitled Inability. We can favor someone through a dirty shirt with Eden fresh hormonal traits, the comforted tang of goat cheese, chocolates, and threadbare pages. Finger war conjecturing the destructive scale, attack strategies of a certain touch, whispers of ABC's backwards, recital of the enemy's national anthem, irrepressible sign patterns, Noah's troubled waters, Napoleon's imperial rages, and Hitler's mutilated faith, flaming twin towels, morality collapsing, a mattress too small, particulars we no longer recall. On occasion, the composed moon swallow up the exhausted sun, the slash across mirror. After a night of wasted paces and X-ray imprints, ants swarm inside familiar tubes, building a nest in our ovaries. A dark rainbow hangs upside down over the bridge of our nose. Sand seeps rigid corners of our eyes, melting over diaphanous decisions. The queen is nowhere to be seen. With the looming removal of the blindfolds, we lose the ability to love one another. Discernment looking in front of our antediluvian orbs. Thank you for having me. Thank you for listening to my thunderous silence and following the ants in the winding roads of my weird head. And to my fellow poets, don't be surprised if I reach out to you for translation permissions. I would love to introduce your wonderful and amazing voices to the Vietnamese-speaking audience on my magazine. And last, and thank you, Ravi, for your invitation to be here. I understand this is your last show, and I am honored to share this finale, this journey with you. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Vivian. That was great. And I'll put the link to Vivian's Ugly Duckling chapbook in the chat as well. And I'm going to bring everyone back on screen. Thank you all. What a wonderful way to spend an hour. I actually feel quite energized. And I don't think it's the poetry. I think it's the work that we have shared. And actually, Vivian kind of began where I wanted to with these kind of points and nodes of connection that exist between us, even though we reside and have been brought up in different parts of the world. And I thought maybe we could start by talking a little bit about motherhood and poetry, which Anna and LESLIANN both wrote about. I mean, Anna, would you talk a little bit about that? Because I find that it's really rare to hear poems about motherhood. Is that something that came naturally to you? Did you feel any resistance to it? I love that. And I also love the title of your book, Flutter Kick, which kind of reminds me of that picnic lightning from Nabokov. I love that little dramatic formulation. But so tell me, I mean, it's obviously, I mean, I'm a father and I've written some poems about my daughters, but it strikes me as kind of rare, and I really find it very appealing that you write so frankly about motherhood.
Yeah, frankly, that's a nice way of putting it. So I don't know. I feel like I couldn't avoid it. You know, I actually I'd love to hear what LESLIANN says about this too. But you know, I do think that it felt risky at first. I'll say, because despite the fact that we all have mothers, and more than half of the population, you know, has at least the ability. Well, actually, I'll say almost all of the population has the ability to become a mother. You know, I think has been viewed as sort of niche in some ways as a subject, which feels, you know, it's such a universal experience that feels strange that should be the case. But, you know, it's also totally all encompassing. And so for me to sit down and not write about it felt like sort of cutting off my head, you know, and trying to, you know, just like, so I couldn't not write about it. And I also feel like it helped. Motherhood really changed my poetics in a way that I wasn't expecting. I talked a little bit about that sort of interruptedness of the experience of motherhood, how you're kind of constantly having to like change focus and take in information and like, you know, work on your feet. There's not a lot of contemplative time. And I think that my poetry from between my first book, which I wrote almost entirely before I became a mother. There are some very early motherhood poems in that book, but almost entirely before I became a mother. The poems are a lot more sort of condensed and I don't know, maybe crystalline in there, because I was able to spend so much time kind of carving out the images and the lines. And in this new book, I'm just, the lines have gotten longer. There's a lot more talking. There are a lot more voices, because that's what it's like to be a parent. You know?
You're immersed in the mess of it.
Yeah, right.
LESLIANN, what do you think?
Well, it's funny because the world of poetry is very curated, we'll say, in terms of what gets attention and what doesn't, right? And so there's this invisible, I don't know, understood rule, right? That we don't write about anything outside of being a poet, right? So the fact that you bring in motherhood, it's like, ooh, really? Do we talk about that? Is that really important, you know? And so for me, I mean, I think a large part of it is, you know, when my first daughter was born, I was part of a writing group and they kind of ghosted me because, I mean, I don't know if it was a conscious thing or an unconscious thing, but it was like, oh, you're a mom, so you're not a poet anymore. So we're going to put you over here. And so that was interesting. And then like with Anna, like what you said, like your sensibilities change. Like, it's just like this huge way of thinking. Now your brain is working in like 500 different directions at the same time. To try to compartmentalize that is really, really hard, to leave it out. So as a child of immigrants, right, as living in the diaspora, I've learned to take on multiple identities, right? It's like I have to be like the good girl that fits into this mold of fitting into the American culture, but then I also have to be the dutiful like daughter of, you know, Asians. And so adding mother to that, it was like, okay, I can't compartmentalize anymore. It's just like, it needs to be all of it. This fractured way of living is just not sustainable. And so the writing was just a natural evolution of like, this is what's happening in my life. This is what's important. And what's happening in my life is related to and correlates with what's happening in the larger world, in the larger scope of things. So, yeah, so it's like, you know, for me, poetry, when I read poems, I always think about Toni Morrison's, you know, sort of call to us. Like, if you don't see the book that you want to read, go freaking write it, right? And so for me, it's like no one talks about motherhood. I mean, at least not in the mainstream, you know, view. No one really, and then if they do, like you said, Anna, it's niche, right? Why can't it just be like a whole human being writing about the things that are happening in our lives and how that it's with our relationship with the collective, with the world? So it's not a conscious thing of like, I'm going to write about motherhood poems. It's like, no, you know, like this is a real thing where my kid is going to college and I'm preparing myself to feel loss. You know, you can't prepare to feel loss, but you know what I mean? And that's something that everyone can relate to as far as just the experience of loss. So why do we have to limit it to, you know, non-parental things?
Yeah. And this is maybe a little bit of a leap. And by the way, Joshua, I was saying, I think you were spending too much time in the office. I opened that fridge and there was like yogurt from like years ago. I was like, I don't think I want to put anything in there. I'm interested in this next project because you're kind of taking a different form of domesticity, which is that of like weight training and exercise. And you're kind of using it as a structural device, if I understand correctly, for this next manuscript. Can you talk a little bit more about it?
Yeah, it was basically the dissertation creative project from my PhD. And basically it thinks about the survival of an Asian American body within like the confines of an ecological like apocalypse, but uses a lot of Jim Bro language to like comment on like toxic masculinity. So like I kind of like thinking about language and like books you want to see. You know, I grew up in those trenches before, so I want to see a book that has like that kind of language, the Jim Bro, the Jim Rat language, and I think it'd be funny and different, and a good exploration of like what it means to think about survival within the body and outside the body.
And how deep into it are you?
Say that again?
How deep into the book are you?
I have like 60 pages. So now I'm in the editing phase where I'm revising everything and restructuring it, and then I'll probably send it out to presses and contests in the fall. Yeah, right. The grind.
And Shilpa, you have published with Kitab, who I know quite well. They actually did an Asian migrant poetry anthology. I don't know if they're still doing that. But tell us, how's it going in Singapore now? What is happening in terms of literature? I know the Writers' Festival is really big. There have been some controversies about free speech and the Penguin book, I remember some years ago. But how are things now on the ground in Singapore?
Oh, it's really cool, actually. The poetry scene here is flourishing. And we are having the upcoming Poetry Festival Singapore, which happens annually every July, the last weekend of July. So, in fact, we are in the process of firming up a lot of our events. We are having the biannual Singapore Literature Conference, and then we are having poetry workshops. We're having poetry readings. And Poetry Festival is basically a multilingual because we showcase all the 4 languages of Singapore, which is like Malay, Tamil, Chinese, and English. So, we have a lot of programs which are geared towards that, and a lot of open mics. So I think there is a lot of like young emerging voices who are very interested. And in fact, we are just having a new program which is coming up, which is the National Poetry Recitation Competition, which we are starting in Singapore. And this is going to be open in all the 3 categories, the small, primary, secondary, and the adults. So there's a lot of excitement for that. So we just conducted a workshop last weekend or so. And that was fun. It was so cool. I did the segment of the embodied movement and how you project your voice and how do you actually use your intonations and, accentuate your voice and pauses and line breaks. So the students are all very excited to participate.
Yeah, I think years ago I did some workshops with Chris Mooney Singh in some Singaporean schools, and we did some spoken word and other things. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. And Vivian, I mean, you are so cosmopolitan, and I wonder if you could tell our audience a little bit more about this journal that you edit. It's a journal of translation, it is?
We have been in the publication scenes for we're probably the longest bilingual Vietnamese-English magazine. We've featured a lot of prominent voices. We've translated a lot of world literature into Vietnamese, and we've translated a lot of Vietnamese authors into English. So we want to bridge the gap between the languages, and also we are one of the few magazines that is uncensored, because inside Vietnam there's huge censorship, and so a lot of writers inside Vietnam would send us work as firewars and firewar and things like that. So some of their works are not being read inside Vietnam, but at least, you know, it's we can give them that platform to give them a voice. So, and we're very interested. I am very interested. I'm the poetry editor, so we have poetry, critical essays, you know, short story, in all different categories. But I'm primarily, along with some other colleagues, is the poetry in charge of poetry section. So I am always reading new voices. I'm always looking for new works to translate into my language. So yes, thank you for allowing me to say a little bit about it, and I hope to have you, my fellow reader, my fellow poets, as collaborators in the future.
Can you talk a little bit more about the censorship inside Vietnam? Because I think people might not know too much about it. What kind of works are being censored?
Any kind of works that might hint, okay, so not even directly criticizing the government, but might hint at innuendos. I think a few years ago, they actually banned a graphic illustration. Okay, it's a graphic illustrations with takes on kind of idioms and a new language, and it was banned because it was deemed mocking of the regime, but when I don't think so, and many readers don't think so. So the level of censorship is pretty cutthroat inside Vietnam. I feel like there's a lot of wonderful voices, people who want to speak up against the government, and not necessarily to overthrow the government, but just to improve the government. Vietnam right now is a communist country, and not as strict as North Korea, obviously, because we can still access the internet and still go on Facebook and etc. But a lot of the content are being controlled by the government, and a lot of the content from overseas are being blocked. So people inside Vietnam cannot access even our own magazine. So we have to figure out a lot of ways. Sometimes we would paste the text, like into the body of the Facebook post and things like that, because our actual link is being blocked. But we figure out creative ways to get voices across. Because I think for me, the most important thing of being a writer is because I have the freedom, and the freedom that I have comes with courage. And I need to speak up, and also give a channel for other people to be able to speak up as well. So that's pretty much my primary goal in writing. I write a lot about history. I write a lot about social issues, and about courage. And I promote courage and freedom within the writing scenes for people who are being restricted right now.
Joshua, do you have any connection to Vietnam yourself? Have you been back there, or?
I've been back twice. I went when I was, last time I was like 13 and then 17. My parents came to the U.S. after the war. I'm from Houston, Texas. So there's a huge Vietnamese population, and then I don't know. There's I'm sure they do it in Dorchester too, which also has a big Vietnamese population. But during I forgot the day it happens, but there's that day where like, I'm not sure if they're celebrating the fall of Saigon or like whatever happened.
April 30th, right?
That always trips me up and makes my family go into very divisive arguments about, Vietnam and like who has the right government. Yeah, April 30th. But yeah, that's my connection, like through my folks and through my elders.
Joshua is a baby, so
Yeah.
he's practically American. You know, he only has a last name. So give him a break.
I got brush up on my.
But he's doing, Joshua is doing important work, which is representing the next generations of Vietnamese. You know, I'm kind of like generation 1.5-ish. So, my responsibilities are a bit different, but Joshua also have a very, very important responsibility as well. So, but it's just in different capacities.
Yeah. Well, I'm cognizant of the time, and so I think what we do, and this has been a little bit of a tradition, and it'll be really nice on this my final Isobreak to sign off this way. At the very end of the Q&A, we kind of go around and we have the kind of fortune cookie at the end of the meal, or the little degustation. And everyone can kind of share a little something about either what you're reading or thinking about or passionate about, or that you want a call to action or us to be aware of, anything at all. And we can kind of hear from everyone in closing. Thank you all for being here again. I'm Ravi Shankar. This is Isobreak. This will be archived on YouTube in a couple of days. And Shilpa, do you want to get us started?
Yeah. Wow. We are almost nearing our end of the session, so it's been amazing. So there was this, I came across this letter written by the famous poet E.E. Cummings, in which he's writing a reply to one of the high school directors. And he says some very interesting things, which I think is a very good advice to us, even though we are emerging senior poets, but I don't know. I think it's like a very evergreen advice, which he talks about. And he says that, almost anybody can learn to think or believe or know, but not a single human being can be taught to feel. And he goes on to say the importance of feeling in poetry and how important it is, that because feeling cannot be taught, right? Everything can be taught. But if you are able to get in touch with your inner feeling and then weave it, whether it is the political fabric or it is your personal life, or it is anything, climate change, anything you are so passionate about, and if you're able to weave that into your writing, then that is what is, I think, the most amazing job which a poet can do, or a writer can bring to the audience, right, or to the reader, is to bring your world. Because each of us, if you see, like we are all 5-6 of us here, and we are coming from such different worlds. And it's so interesting to get insight from each other about what kind of lives they have led, and what are the backgrounds they have come from, and what is the journey or the strife we have all led to where we are today. And I am an immigrant now in Singapore, having lived here for the last 20 years. And I'm working on a collection where I am looking at retracing my roots, and how I'm reinventing myself and realigning myself in a new country, a new host country, and still have this, little longing for my homeland. So I think these are, it's just boils down to what E. Cummings said so beautifully. And therefore I felt that I should share that with you all, that the feeling, it's all about the feeling.
Yeah. Thank you, Shilpa.
Thank you.
LESLIANN, what do you think? Give us some wisdom.
Well, the thing that I've been lately examining and exploring is this idea of extraction. It's totally like not poetic at all, but it's this this idea in which artists are expected to give and give and give without recompense, without any kind of like, even just like tangible, like poets, right? Poets is like the starving poet. It's like, why can't poets get paid? Like exposure does not pay the bills. So I'm thinking about this, about extraction, and how our capitalist society really thrives on that. And how can we dismantle that? How can we shift that paradigm into one of reciprocity? And to draw boundaries around what we do give in the spirit of giving, rather than in this spirit of like, all right, I'm just going to give you all and you can just take it. that there's a very nuanced energy in that. When I create something and I want to share it with the world, I am in charge of how I want to share that. I'm not going to necessarily do it like, ooh, I need to like enter this poetry contest and like just give all my stuff out of desperation for, accolades or whatever, or attention, whatever it is. Instead, can I consider what I create as a gift that I've created to share with people who are in the place to receive it and really appreciate it. And perhaps not that I would get something in return from them, but perhaps they pay it forward. So this is what's been on my mind as far as just the energy around extraction versus genuine giving and reciprocity. Whatever that looks like. It could be in art, it could be in business, it could be in like just energy that you output with your relationships with family and friends and things like that. So that's what and then in sort of to kind of bring that back to a literary thing, I'm also in conversation with Evie Shockley's new book, Suddenly We, which I highly y'all recommend to check out, where she really examines those kinds of dynamics of the struggle, during isolation, and humanity, and what it is to be human in those kinds of spaces of isolation, and how many people were trying to extract in order to survive, and how many people were there to lift up. So these are the things that are on my mind right now.
Great. Yeah, reciprocity, community, so important. Joshua?
Back in parking is underrated. No, I'm joking. I think it's true, but I like a quick escape in case. But I mean, I went to a reading in like 2017 maybe, or maybe 2015. Who knows? I can't remember. It was Ocean Vong, and Ocean said, like, they take like 6 months to write a poem because they think about it for like 6 months maybe, or 5 months and write it. And that really, inspired me to like think about my own writing practice and like what I need to produce work in my own capacity. And so like, if you write every day as a practice, that's very cool. But I think that like learning early on that like, you don't have to write every day if that's not what you're best at. You can figure out different mechanisms or structures of writing. Like I have like a notes app of like all ideas, like all poem titles or little clips I just create a huge notes of ideas for like 3 months. And then usually in the summers, I'll write a first draft to all of those things. And I'll just leave it for like 2 months because I need like objective distance. So I learned with myself, I need like 2 months of objective distance from those drafts. I can come back and be like, oh, that line was really shitty, or that line was really bad. And I can say that after 2 months of not looking at it for a while. Ocean just taught me to cultivate your own writing structure as best as they need to early on. I hope everyone listening could figure that out if you haven't yet.
Yeah, thanks for letting us peer behind the curtain. It's always so interesting to hear about process from writers. Vivian?
Just to pick up on Joshua, I do kind of do the same thing. I'm one of those writers that are not really, I rather go out and experience life than write, to be honest. But I do have just random ideas that comes up. So I would just put it in my notes. And then, one day when I feel like the emotions are overwhelming enough, then I'll sit down and write a whole bunch. But I'm not one of those, daily writers. But I also touch upon sort of like my mission as a writer and as a human being. My parents sacrificed a lot, and a lot of Vietnamese people sacrifice a lot for us to be here, to have freedom. So just want to reiterate that as a writer, we must have courage. If it's courage to face ourselves, it's courage to make a difference, it's courage to speak up. I think that words do matter. And I'm obsessed with this concept of time in a lot of my collection. It's not because I fear time, but it's almost, I feel like sometimes our life can be looping, year by year. I keep a journal of the things I do, and like 5 years down the road, I'm like, what? This week I was eating the same thing I was eating like 5 years ago, right? It comes up a lot. So I'm like, okay, if we are predestined, like, some Buddhist religions, they think that, our life have this pre-built algorithm, etc. If say we are predestined, right? Then, like, say we got chess pieces and all that, then it is my wish that through my writing that I can be self-realizing and self-writing, and that's why the title of my book is She's Self-Writing, is that we can all be self-writing, and that through the restrictions of whatever we call destinies, or something perpetual and something courageous can be created out of us.
That's beautifully said. Yeah, awareness of the habituated patterns that kind of keep us stuck in this groove. Absolutely. And then Anna, finally.
Thanks. I love that idea of like that there's like a spiritual algorithm that's showing us who we are.
LESLIANN can speak to that on her podcast. Next subject.
Pre-Facebook, yeah. So I guess, wow, it's hard to have the last word after hearing all of those profound ideas. I'll start by saying that I've been recently reading Adrienne Rich, who's somebody who I find, energizing and brave, and whose example I want to follow. I've particularly been reading her essay collection, What Is Found There. And in it, she talks a lot about, I think, what you've all been saying, like letting the voices in, all of the voices in all their multifariousnesses, multitudes, and not sort of trying to censor the self and also write to an imagined audience, but instead write to the core of what is important to us. And I think, if the pandemic did anything beneficial for us, it was to kind of shine a light on all of the shine a light into our homes, right? Like we couldn't avoid showing ourselves that way anymore. For me as a mother, for instance, I sort of gave up the idea of like trying to pretend that I had like a career and a family life, because they were just, like together. So all of our differences came through in a way that was painful in many ways, and illustrated a lot of injustice, but also got it out there. So I think that going forward, that's sort of my mantra in writing, is like, let it all out. And also to like really appreciate and encourage and like want to hear other people doing the same. And I'm not talking about like letting go of craft. I certainly like Joshua, I like to spend a lot of time on my work. Revision is a huge tool in my practice, certainly, but just, trying to let the first draft at least really show everything that has been going on, and then I can find what needs to stay. So yeah. I mean, Adrienne Rich makes this point in the preface of What Is Found There, that there's often a critique of poetry that takes on more quote unquote politicized subject matter, that it's didactic, that it's immature in some way, automatically unsuccessful. And she says, there are a lot of like really crappy love poems that have been written over the centuries and centuries that we've been writing poetry, but nobody then automatically says, okay, we can't write poems about love anymore. Forget it. Like, it's done, right? So it's kind of an easy point, but it's very true, right? So all of this kind of hiding away of the self and, feeling as though we have to fit into a particular poet mode is, and I'm also really alive to what you're talking about, LESLIANN, about equity and paying people for their work, their hard work. It reminds me of the in the late 1960s. My in-laws were really involved in a lot of the protest movements then, and there was a strike at Harvard by all of the maintenance workers there, and they wanted a raise, and their big rallying cry was, you can't eat prestige. And I think about that all the time. It's like, gotta pay the rent, you know? Anyway, I'll leave us on the Harvard sanitation strike workers.
Yes. You can't eat prestige or contributors' copies, unfortunately. All right, and I will just say, I mean, this has been such a wonderful. I'm really gratified to kind of end this run of 3 years with this wonderful conversation, and thanks to all of you. I just want to echo this idea of community. I think it is really important. We work in isolation. This organization, even though the members are all over the world, have provided this really great network of connection. And I will just end. I received a postcard, and postcards are so underrated, by the way, getting something in the mail that's not a bill. But it didn't have a return sender on it. It didn't. All it had was this message, and this is what I'll end us with. It was a message from Truman Capote on there, and it just said, "Failure is the condiment that gives success its flavor." And I remember I was like, is someone like having a dig at me? Like, what is, I mean, and then I was just thinking about it more, and I love that quote. I mean, I think just the fact that failure is not the entree, it's the thing that kind of is on top of something, and that it actually helps frame whatever successes that you have. And those successes for me are not just individual, but communal. So thank you all so much for being here. I know Isobreak will hopefully continue and will be in good hands. I look forward to being on the other side of the MC monitor. And so for everyone all over the world, good morning, good night. Thank you all. I'm Ravi Shankar. This has been Isobreak. Check us out later on YouTube. I'm out. Take care, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ravi. All the best, guys. Yeah,
Thank
bye.
you.
Bye.